Hi, welcome. This is part two of our lecture on basic concepts in immunology. Okay, so this is exactly where we left off. And let me just tell you that this is the most basic representation of a cell. I was mentioning how we're changing scales. The unit for epidemic models used to be the individual and groups or population sizes of individuals, populations of people. These people that get infected are suffering of infection due to a pathogen. And that process is happening inside every individual. These individuals are called host. Okay, and you can think of the pathogen as a parasite that is using the host for its own advantage. Okay, so specifically inside a host, inside an individual, um, we're actually here illustrating the life cycle of a virus. And what you're seeing here is if you think of a cell, think of a fried egg basically, and think of that the fried egg is going to have a white part, right? As would be the membrane. Sorry, my apologies if this is way too basic for you, but it doesn't hurt. And the middle part is going to have the yellow orange part that's going to be considered the nucleus. Okay, so what you're seeing here is I don't know if you guys have heard of green eggs, but this is something in that spirit. And think of that fried egg cut in half. Okay, so here we have a representation, rather cartoonish, of the nucleus of the cell and the cytoplasma and the membrane. Okay, so and then we have this little thing that is approaching this cell, okay, and this is going to be the pathogen, specifically here, the A virus. So let's see how this pathogen, this virus, what happens then is getting a little closer, and it eventually, um, did you see that? This representation, this cartoon representation of this virus is going to be called a viral particle or a piece of virus. Sometimes it's called viron or virion. Okay, and I don't know if you saw the landing, but this so-called virion has these things there hanging on its surface. All right, and you could see how that spike or whatever that is in the surface of this virion, it actually helps in attaching itself to this membrane. And what is going to come next is that you want to think of the pathogen, the virus here, as the free loader, right? So this is the unwanted. It's a parasite, and somebody wrote in one of these books some words that I think they're always helpful in kind of trying to remember how this what's at stake here. The um, the cell is the host, and the virus is the parasite, and basically the virus um, demands to the cell reproduce me. Okay, so it's unwanted because it's somebody, something that's kind of uh, an outsider is coming in and is having explicit demands. And what comes next is that the virus it passes through the membrane, goes into the cytoplasm, and it's eventually going to find its way into the nucleus of the cell. This part is extremely important because the virus is incapable of making replications of itself. So for reproduction purposes, that's how the parasite uses the host. And what undergoes here is basically, you guys are familiar with hackers and computer hacking. Well, here this virus is hacking the cell. Specifically, it goes and it hacks the nucleus of the cell, because the nucleus of the cell is what the virus will use to make copies of itself. If you Okay, so you can see all sorts of analogies here. So, but basically, for a means of reproduction, the virus needs the nucleus of the cell, and then, boom, this happens. So now here is a representation, very cartoonish, of a bunch of baby viruses. We're going to call those virions, and eventually they will be released from this cell into the bloodstream, at least for the viruses we're going to be discussing here. But so these are some of the, you will find a lot of schematics on this type of thing, animations, and it's important to keep a clear picture as to the basic steps on finding a target cell, attaching itself to it, finding its way into the inside of the cell, specifically to the nucleus, and then using the nucleus, hacking the nucleus of that cell to make other particles of virus, which in turn later will be released. So let's talk about some specific examples of pathogens. Here is an example of a virus. We are perhaps very familiar with this type of virus because it's related to is the virus that we typically call the flu. Okay, and in this part of the world, in the United States, there is something we call the flu season or the influenza season, which it's correlated with weather. And during the winter, um, between what is called the influenza season extends from October of the calendar year into April or May of the following year. Okay, so for influenza, we would say there are three main types. You can say there is influenza type A, influenza type B, and influenza type C. And for these viruses, something very specific has to do with proteins that are found in the surface of the influenza virus. There is one protein that's called hemagglutinin and is denoted with HA. And there is another protein called neuraminidase, which is denoted with NA. So you could refer to subtypes of one type. You can say there are subtypes of influenza A, for example, influenza H1N1, H2N2, and H3N3. So here the letter H has to do with this protein, and the letter N has to do with the other protein. And these are things that are in the surface of this virus, which are fundamental for the life cycle in how the virus attaches to the target cell and so on. Okay, so here's an illustration of what the influenza virus looks like, and here are some very colorful representations on these two proteins, on hemagglutinin and neuraminidase. Okay, and there is some kind of cut there, sectional cut, so you could have a view into inside of one virion of influenza. And here's another representation of the process that we previously um, talked about, in which there are all those steps of a virion approaching the surface of the cell and then finding, kind of going through the membrane, finding its way inside to hacking this cell, and then eventually producing more particles of virus. So another example that merits attention here, time to discuss, is another virus that we hear, that we know about, and this virus typically is referred. So the influenza virus has nickname flu. This virus has a nickname HIV, and this is because these are its initials. This is known as the human immunodeficiency virus. Okay, HIV. And this is a schematic representation with basically uh, seven steps. The first of which, this is a schematic representation on the life cycle of HIV, and the first steps have to do with this particle, this virion, of HIV, finding its way into the surface of the cell that the virus is targeting, until it eventually passes through and it hacks the nucleus of that cell and it produces offspring, and eventually that new offspring goes to the surface but into not necessarily the entry point, somewhere else, and is then catapulted into the rest of the bloodstream. Okay, so you can review this in more detail, but this is a simple representation. So the immune system has, broadly speaking, two types of layers, okay? Two types of responses. One is called innate response, and the other one is called specific response. So innate responses are also referred as non-specific responses, and then we have specific responses that are also known as adaptive responses. So we're going to pause here and we will continue um, with more details about the main responses of the immune system.